Welcome to our weekly live stream recording of the M&A Zing, a podcast series devoted to acquisition entrepreneurs, search funds, and holdco builders in the UK, EU, and beyond. We discuss the topics and challenges that impact SMB succession M&A, exploring the highs and lows of searching, acquiring, owning, and operating small and medium-sized businesses. This week, we're back with a more familiar format, the ever-popular buy-side breakdowns, but once again, it's a slightly different lineup for you all. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Toby Johnson. Welcome, Toby. Thanks for joining me today.
So happy to join, Alfie. Been in the background in many of these podcasts, and finally to come and show my face on one. I'm delighted to do so.
Absolutely. So for those of you that don't know Toby, and if you've had any interactions with BizCrunch before, you probably will have spoken to him at least once. Toby heads up most of the sell-side activity at BizCrunch, which makes him the perfect guest host for a buy-side breakdown today. So with that in mind, Toby, what company are we looking at today?
Yep. So today we'll be taking a closer look at a logistics and transport business based in the Northwest England. What makes this company particularly interesting is the way it's been built around like three different distinct revenue sources. I'm not sure if it came out to play like that. But there's a professional driver training, a busy road haulage operation, and then a pallet storage within their warehouse. And I believe that one warehouse is like around 10,000 square feet, which pretty much accompanies all of those three different revenue streams inside. So definitely a lot to break into and an interesting proposition for the buy side breakdown.
Yeah, absolutely. Now this one's a bit of a mystery because usually when we find these listings, I can find out who the company are, and we don't divulge it on the podcast at all. But I normally can get a bit of a background in, but I can't seem to find this company, which is makes it all the more of an enigma for us.
Very elusive.
Very elusive. But let's go through some of the numbers here. So the asking price that they've put on this business is £1 million. That's with 2.5 million turnover. The net profit is undisclosed, but the gross profit is 700,000 a year.
Yeah, super interesting. I think just right off the bat, even seeing that they say their turnover is around 2.5 million. They actually quote almost 2.5 million, and that gross profit in excess of 700,000. I wonder how almost that 2.5 is and how much in excess that 700,000 is. But yeah, having that 25 to maybe around 30% gross profit, I think that falls pretty much average within the industry. I think it usually spans from like 20 to 40%. But it mainly thinking about, how that's structured. If they put a lot of those overheads into the cost of goods sold, like there's a lot of different ways that the accountancy can go about structuring that. I've seen businesses that have majority of stuff just placed into the overheads, and then vice versa. Like I just explained, a lot of businesses put way too much into the cost of goods sold, and then it looks like their gross profit is just mediocre when it could actually be a lot higher. So, like I said, this one does fall into that average range, but it'll be interesting getting into the numbers if somebody actually does reach out on an interested basis to really see, what the breakdown is there.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons that I'm frustrated that I couldn't find the company, because usually I will try and sort of dig them up and look at their accounts, and or Gareth will do that. He's actually the best at doing that. So that's what we're kind of missing him this week, because he's found a couple that I haven't managed to dig up over the years. Well, look, when we're talking about prices, I think one thing to flag straight away is that £1 million asking price doesn't include the fleet, plant, or equipment.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. Because usually with like a business of this size, obviously the gross profit's around 700,000, or above 700,000, whatever that may be. But how much actually goes to the bottom line, or that usual term that's thrown around in the industry, EBITDA, and discussing EBITDA multiples. Them undisclosing their net profit kind of just pops up as like a red flag for me, because it's like, how much are they actually cash flowing? And if they want $1 million, and that's not even talking about their assets, for me, this is just jumping out as this will probably become a NAV deal. And sometimes I'm not sure how common this is in the logistics industry, but there'll be some goodwill, or maybe they built some processes that they can kind of attach a little bit of a premium onto their net asset value. That's what NAV means for everyone who's not a financial person who's listening. Um, but yeah, it'll just be really interesting to see, like, what that gross profit breaks down to and becoming like net profit and those margins that I was talking about, that EBITDA margin. Because yeah, 1 million on top of their net asset value or asset value. Not sure how much there's leverage here. There's really not a lot of financials to go off of,
Yeah,
which is yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. I mean, you need a detailed inventory list with the fleet, plant, and equipment stuff in there with some fair market value, some market against. I'd be really interested to see the breakdown of where that turnover is coming from those three sort of avenues of the business. Because if a large portion of that is coming from the training side, then um, I don't think that valuation is too much of a problem. The 1 million from the 700K gross, because you can understand the portability of that training school and the name that they've built up, and the prestige that they might have, and the list of drivers that they've trained, and all of those things you think could move over. I think if it's mainly coming from the haulage side, that becomes a bit more of a problem, because obviously that 700K profit isn't accessible to you unless you pay the extra on top for the fleet, plant, and equipment, unless you are doing this as part of a roll up, or you already own a haulage based business in the Northwest anyway. And how much of it comes from the storage side, because the pallet-based storage is obviously a 10,000 square foot warehouse in the Northwest, but that is also not included in this price, and you get a fair market rental for that on top. So yeah, I'd be really interested to see what the breakdown is for what they want, what cost they're looking for those assets, and where this income is coming from. Like I said, if it's primarily coming from training, then I don't think it's a problem. If most of it's coming from the haulage, it's slightly different.
Yeah, it's interesting because they do actually mention that the haulage receipts account for approximately 1.8 of that 2.5 turnover. Um, so that leaves what, 700,000 to be divided against their training and their warehouse activities. So if that's 50 split, that's 350 on both ends. Like, that's still pretty minor.
Mm.
So I'm wondering, they either have to be either just an avenue in which the owner seems, you know, why not go down this route because it'll help and be synergistic to the overall play of their haulage, or I don't know, there has to be some bonus, or just extremely cash generative. Those are my two, because they have only 700,000 pounds split between those two avenues. Um, it's just interesting, to say the least.
It is interesting. I do absolutely see the value. I mean, obviously, if you've got excess storage space and you want to rent that out, I can totally see that whatever value you make from that is better than having empty space. With the driver training, I think that's super interesting, because I'm not sure how up to date you are, Toby, on the driver shortage that we had during COVID in the UK. But so in sort of 2021, there was a real um, issue that we had with drivers in the UK. So I think it was in the kind of aftermath of Brexit. We'd lost a lot of EU-based drivers. The minimum wage had gone up, and driver wages kind of hadn't risen with it. And they got to a point where I think it's almost 50% of haulage companies in the UK were advertising for drivers, and there were lots of shelves that didn't get stocked in the UK, and it was national news. And they were even talking about like drafting in the army to drive articulated lorries to deliver food and goods, and it was a whole big issue. So I think that having the training school there, not only it brought a lot of new drivers to the market, hearing about that issue. There was also a bump in wages for HGV drivers, which obviously brought more drivers to training. And again, if there are drivers queuing up to be trained, then having a training school makes sense. It also would make sense to have a steady stream of drivers coming through to their company, because I had a quick look, and vacancy rates are still at about 20%. So, 1 in 5 haulage companies in the UK still don't have enough drivers. So even if
Yeah,
I get
I read somewhere that also the turnover for drivers for some reason is extremely high. I was wondering if you also saw that statistic or
Yes, I did. Yes.
going around.
Yeah, I did. There was an article about this in the Financial Times recently, and they were talking about the turnover. And I think it comes back to wages and also sort of unsociable hours, I guess, especially if you're doing long distance driving. It's a very heavily regulated industry in terms of the amount of times that drivers can go on for. So if you're doing pan European trips, I think you can drive for, I think it's up to 12 and a half hours, something like that. Don't quote me on that, any HGV drivers out there, before you have to stop and rest for a set period of time, and you have to be able to sleep. And so, you're away for kind of days at a time, and hours can change, and traffic jam, and all sorts of things like that. So, I think that once upon a time when drivers were particularly well remunerated, I think that was fine. But I think these days where, I've seen some adverts out there for HGV drivers at sort of 14, 15 pounds an hour. If you think that minimum wage is about £12.20 now, you kind of think, I could go and work somewhere for minimum wage and not have to be away from my family for a couple of days at a time. So I can definitely see that still be a problem. And
Yeah,
again,
it makes you think. It makes you think about like why the turnover is so high, because like obviously there's a lot of training needed to become one of these drivers. So is it just because they get better offers and that's why they just keep going on to a bigger and better position within its
yeah,
company? Or
yeah. I mean, it might also be that uh, it seems more attractive than it is when they go into it. I think that, I sat there during COVID and I thought, it can't be that bad. I sit in the truck and listen to music, and I don't have to talk to anybody for a couple of days at a time. And maybe the reality of it isn't great as the fantasy of it. Yeah, it might just be one of those things that, yeah, once you get into it, you realize it's not as quite as fun as it seems. But yes, and there's a lot of driver training required. You have to I think it's once every 5 years, you have to do 35 hours worth of training, which again lends itself well to this business having the training school, because you have a steady resupply of clients coming back and doing their training again and again. And high turnover is not a problem for this business if they do have a pipeline of people coming through their training school. And high turnover of driver does means more people being trained. So where it probably is an issue for lots of haulage companies, if you have a bolted on driver training school. So yeah, maybe that explains why, even if they're not making huge money from it, I guess it kind of plugs one of the big problems of haulage, which is, like you said, turnover.
yeah, yeah, that'd definitely be an interesting metric to really look at to see, what their, and also what their utilization within the training is. Like, I believe they mentioned on the website listing that around 25 were able to fit in like the singular classroom that they have. So
Yeah.
if they're actually getting 25 drivers into each course or each training program, um, what that training program even looks like, if it's, fully online. These days everything, digitisation of practically everything is imminent. Um, so it'd be
Yeah.
super interesting to get into the nitty-gritty of that training and see the metrics and see actually how it is from a
Yeah.
operator standpoint.
Absolutely. Is there, are their instructors and coaches sort of in-house, or is that somebody that they have to pay a fee to come in? How often are they booked? Are there opportunities to expand that by offering digital portions through colleges in different regions, and maybe they come in to do practical stuff? I do not know enough about HGV driver training, but I'm guessing there are probably some avenues for expansion there.
Well, luckily on their listing, it also says that they have a full complement of staff dedicated to the training side of the business. So
Okay.
someone comes in and they don't have much knowledge on it. I have no idea what a full complement of staff means in that area, but would be interesting to break that down further.
Well, I mean, if they have staff there all of the time, of a full complement of staff, as you say, then I'm guessing maybe they are fairly regularly booked, and this isn't an issue. So then again, I suppose we'd have to go back to that 700K that's left over, that they're making up that revenue, and say, how much of that comes from the training and how much of it comes from the pallet storage. I mean, actually, I don't think 50-50 would be fair, because they'd have to be storing a hell of a lot of pallets to be making 350K a year from it, I would guess. So maybe it is more heavily weighted to
Well, even if
trade.
you didn't turnover, yeah, I guess, yeah, no, that's about right.
So
It mentioned a 10,000 square foot.
yes, so I've got some more. I've got some more business facts here that we haven't covered. So they're a family-run business, which is always a good thing. Hopefully, we've got a good reputation within the industry. They've been around for almost 15 years, which is the magic number on BizCrunch. So we always set our kind of established business markers to be 15 years plus. We say that's the mark of a company that's survived a couple of recessions and is fairly robust. So that's definitely a positive. They are DVSA, CILT, and SQ8 approved. So they are approved for all training and drivers. I think CILT is the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. So They're completely covered there. I did a little bit of research into this, and anybody coming in and buying the company doesn't need to have any sort of training of their own in order to maintain this, but they will still need to, maintain their memberships. There may be some additional staff training needed, and they need to be certainly aware of this and which kind of members of staff they need to retain. Because I would imagine that if the owner doesn't need to have any particular certification, I'm guessing at least one member of staff would need to. So that's something when it comes to staff retention, you need to be careful that you are either ready to retain or hire a new member of staff that is knowledgeable in each of these sort of facets. Again, unless you are already a haulage company or you're part of a roll up of companies like this, and you can kind of facilitate that off the bat.
Yeah, I wonder if the full suite of staff they have for that training, if that knowledge is within there, or if it's actually within the owners. That'll be a pretty big thing going forward, because you'll have to retain the owners for at least a year at that to get all this knowledge out of them, unless that's with the management team and that staff already in place.
Yeah, and I think that's fairly standard these days as well, to want to retain the owner for a while.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, so we for anybody that hasn't seen it yet, there's a really great episode from that we did from live from the Serial Acquirers Symposium, which has the guys from Astra Holdings and Moonbase, and they were talking about how long they like to retain business owners for and the knowledge that they can impart and stuff. And I think it becomes fairly standard now. But I think that it also raises a point which we always have to bring up on this podcast, which is is there a risk there that if owner leaves from a family run business, how many client relationships suffer? And again, I know that's teaching people to suck eggs at this point, and everybody needs to think about that. But I think that sort of key person dependence is particularly important with family run businesses.
yeah, yeah. It does seem like they have a bit of a management structure in place, though, just from the listing. But yeah, it definitely is. If they are that client head who talks to everyone, yeah, it's really important to see, what businesses will leave once they leave, especially if they're asking $1 million on top of that net asset value price, because you'll probably have to do this as a structured earnout, and dependent on how many clients stay with you, or put some limitation and warranties on that client retention there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's an interesting point. What would how would you look at structuring a deal like this? Would you look at maybe doing some sort of asset-backed lending if you wanted to take the assets from them, and the plant and the storage, and then do some sort of earn out for the rest? Like, what would be your ideal deal structure for a company like this?
Well, to be fair, it's pretty hard to get into, just because there's not much information here.
Sure.
They're alluding to assets. What assets is that? A fleet, a fleet can be 3 vehicles or 20. There's a lot of unknowns. So I would first off, get somebody who knows the industry. Maybe someone who's also mechanical, who can inspect the fleet. Value that on, from somebody I trust, and then probably go from there. The asking price of $1 million on top of whatever that net asset value price will be. I think that's a bit rough. You know, Getting owners' expectations down from that will be difficult, because it's 700 gross profit. So I can't imagine that this business is turning over anything more than, or cash flowing more than 300 to 400, and that's saying that they have very minimal overheads, and that half of that, or almost half of that, is going to the bottom line. So
Well, and you would imagine with this kind of business that minimal. I wouldn't imagine minimal overheads would be likely, because there are a lot of things to
doesn't sound like it.
there are a lot of things to pay for. There are a lot of things to, upkeep and maintenance and vehicle costs and yeah. I mean, again, I suppose it depends on how much they put into operational costs and how they've structured that, as you said sort of earlier on.
Yeah,
Um,
it says they have a full team of highly skilled staff on the books. So, like, if they're properly in the overheads, that's
Oh, so you
If
mean like if they have sort of like maintenance stuff and that kind of thing, and whether they have all that in house?
Yeah. Um, and they say they have a full-time transport manager, a fleet manager, administrations manager, full 2-time logistic planners, 18 full-time class 1 drivers, like all of these things. I bet some of them can go into the cost of goods sold, and then likely from just this percentage basis. And um, not exactly sure how logistics industry works. I don't specialize obviously in that industry. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see just the breakdown of where those costs fall into, and like I said, just how much is going to the bottom line. Because if you see, like I said, 300 around 300 EBITDA, let's just say, even at a 4x multiple, that's 1.2. So they're already asking for 1 million on top of their net asset value. That's why I think this will definitely become like just a deal that will just come down to the assets and their value. And then the owner with that 1 million on top is definitely looking for some goodwill, which isn't common. So unless, like I said, it's a brilliantly built business, some alliteration that just got me tongue twisted. Um, yeah, it's gonna be difficult. There's definitely gonna be some hurdles to overcome here. But at the same time, it's diversified. Each of its different revenue streams can complement each other. So there's definitely some quality aspects about this business. But the numbers that they allude to is just not specific enough to really make a informed decision.
Yeah, I totally agree. You raised some interesting points in there. We were talking about some of the different staff members that they had. You were talking about sort of logistics and sort of transport management. And I would guess that there is a huge amount of software and use systems required to manage a fleet and a business like this. Because like I said, you've got drivers traveling all over the world for different sort of regulatory bodies needing to be informed, and even I guess now with Brexit, you're going to need sort of visas and all sorts of things like this. You need staff management. Again, they need to be rested for certain amounts of times. That's going to affect your timetabling. I guess there's a huge amount of back office work that is going on here. And I'd look, obviously, this is not something you would get from a listing like this, and it would come out in the wash as you start to have your more sort of exploratory conversations. But I'd be interested in seeing how efficient those processes are, if there's any room for improvements there. How a 15-year-old family business, I don't want to make any assumptions, but maybe they, how much have they updated and improved in over those 15 years?
Well, operated successfully for 15 years. So apparently they've had some unsuccessful operations as well.
Potentially, prior to those 15 years, they had some unsuccessful ones. But yeah, I'd love to know sort of what is going on there and whether there are some operational efficiencies that can be made. Um, is there anything that, again, if I'm looking at expansion, I would look, probably my first port call would be in the training, because that'd be easier to expand, I would imagine. But again, this is me coming at this as somebody who isn't from a haulage background, and does see absolutely the value in this business. But I think if you come from a haulage background, do you know who would have been great for this call? Actually, would be our friend Charlie Norton, because Charlie knows this inside out. So I'd love to know what Charlie thinks
Very
about
true.
the business. But yeah, if you come from that kind of background, you're going to know, probably even at a glance from this listing, a little bit more than we can glean from it, and maybe they could even figure out who the company is. But yeah, what are those operational efficiencies? Where can improvements be made? How is best to expand? It says that you can move this company, because it's saying that they're only a rented premises. But I would be,
Every company's movable, right?
every company's
This
movable.
one's
Yeah,
it's hard.
this one seems particularly difficult. I think also as well, you would probably lose any goodwill that's been built up around that sort of family name. Part of the reason that you're buying this business is because it has been family run for 15 years and it's built up a name and a reputation. And I think that you disrupt that local goodwill by relocating. I would say there.
Yeah, you have
Again,
to also see just because of family-owned businesses. That's a big point to bring up, because a lot of acquirers don't like family-owned businesses because um, either the family's too built into the business and maybe like the grandfather's selling, but there's still nieces, nephews, sons, daughters in the business, and once they leave and there's different operation oversight, it gets a bit sticky sometimes. You have to make some decisions that pivot or switch around the operation. And anyone who's existing, obviously this can go for regular employees too, but
Sure.
I think there's usually more of a tendency for those people in the family to get a little more bothered by change than regular employees.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I suppose that raises another interesting point as to if this is a family-run business, why is somebody in the family not taking it over? That is another good point that, yeah, I hadn't really considered. Yeah, if this is, owned by mum, dad, grandma, granddad, whoever it might be, why isn't somebody else in the family stepping up and taking over? Why is there no sort of succession happening here? Um, which is
At
really
least because that net profit margin is actually super low because it's undisclosed here. All made an
maybe.
assumption.
Maybe, although we can't cast aspersions, Toby. We don't know, but yes, maybe. I mean, look, look, immediately when we looked at this listing, that was a kind of a red flag that threw me off. I mean, you don't always get a huge amount of detail in these things, but to have turnover and gross listed but not net, I think, yeah, immediately does make you worry. It says in the listing high profitability, but that's in a broker's listing, and I don't know what that means. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
You reach out and they're like, oh, gross profitability, not net profitability.
But again, it comes back to how that's structured. Um, yeah, I think that this is a really interesting business. I think that if you are looking for a sort of scalable business with multiple levers, it's something that you could look at. I think if you're a roll-up operator in logistics, warehousing, or even in education, actually, I think they could be a sort of logical move for you. I think if you're maybe an MBO candidate with a bit of sort of regional and inside knowledge, I think maybe that'd be good for you. But yeah, I think mainly that. Sorry.
It would
Go
be
on.
interesting. Yeah, it would be interesting. I don't know. You mentioned scalability of the training. It says the classroom can only accommodate 25 people.
Mhm.
So the usage metrics, I think, will be really key in what an operator or a new operator can do with his business. Like how much is the warehouse being utilized on a higher basis? How much is the training really booked out? And then also like how are those systems ran? Um, is it on a spreadsheet? Is it on a book? Or is these online processes built and ready for scalability? So
Yeah, I think also an understanding of how the teaching has to be delivered for this, because is there a certain amount of this that needs to be in person? Could there be a heavy link towards sort of digitization? Could you partner with other organizations and colleges? And, while there is still a shortage of truck drivers, is this something you could work with, local colleges to put programs into? And that's something that maybe you need a little bit of insider knowledge for. And again, maybe why somebody in education might consider it a move for a company like this.
yeah.
Okay, look, I think that leads us on to the conclusion of our episode. So, this is where we do a sort of buy or pass, a thumb up or a thumb down. So, Toby, if this is you today looking at this listing, obviously we need a little bit more information, but where do you lean, buy or pass?
I think there's a lot of unknowns, obviously, like you just alluded to. I'd want to know the net asset value. I'd want to know the bottom line net profitability. How they're valuing that assets versus, someone who I trust, a mechanic, whatever, going into the business and seeing if they're even close on valuation. Um, Estimated capex, because with a business with this high um assets and it probably being a net asset value deal, the capex post acquisition is needed to be estimated by not only myself but a professional in the industry. But just because of that 1 million pounds on top of the fleet value or the net asset value, it's gonna have to be passed for me. I just think that's gonna put the owners thoughts about the valuation on the business too much out of my wheelhouse, or if I was an acquirer's wheelhouse. How about you, Alfie?
I think I agree with you on that. I think I was leaning by when I sort of first looked at this, but I think you're right. There is a lot of information still to be found. I think potentially if I was in the industry, like I said, if I was already looking at roll ups in this, if I knew the industry very well, I would definitely look for more information on it. But I do think that if the financial outlook was as rosy as the listing says it was, then they would have put the information in the listing. It's generally how I feel about that. So I think if you are in the haulage industry or you're in education, I think it's one to maybe get a bit more info on and have that initial call. But I think for me, it's also going to be a pass.
Yeah, it's just the utilization is also a big key there, and then the owner's position within the business. Like, is this fully dependent on the owner? They do mention they have like pretty turnkey operations set in place for at least the training side.
Mhm.
So is that the same with the warehouse hire and the haulage?
Sure.
And then they also mentioned that the warehouse is like as at a fair market value, but what lease do they have in place? Is that renewing soon? Um, the warehouse seems to be pretty detrimental to the operations. Um, a lot of factors that can put it in very positively, but also can impact it very negatively as well. So
That's actually a point we didn't raise is that are we renting this facility from them at fair market value or is it rented from somebody else? If it is rented from somebody else, why are we renting 10,000 square feet that we then have to hire some of it out to somebody else? So yeah, every avenue we go down, there are more questions than answers. So
which isn't necessarily a bad thing,
no,
These could have amazing answers.
they could have amazing answers. But as I said, if they have amazing answers, it usually be in the listing. So yeah, from both of us, it's going to be a pass. But I would love to hear what you, our viewers and listeners, think. So if you've got a different view on this, please do let us know. If you particularly have any knowledge in this industry, I'd love to hear from you. And if Toby and I have completely missed something that haulage and education experts know, then please do let us know. Type it in the comments, put it in the LinkedIn comments on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. For those of you that are BizCrunch users, we have some really exciting updates coming for you soon. So please do keep an eye out on your emails. And also make sure that you're looking out for the ETA Awards hosted by Gerald Edelman, which will be soon. And myself and the BizCrunch team will be there. So if you are coming along, please do come and say hi. I will drop a link to getting your tickets at the bottom of this video. But yeah, until next time, keep on crunching.
Keep on crunching.
Thanks, Toby.
Cheers, Alfie.